Welcome to the channel about news from around the world. While you subscribe and like it, we're going to start.
Among all the states that joined the Solidarity Alliance, I was personally most surprised by Finland, a country that for decades received solid dividends from maintaining good neighborly relations with Russia, and then it suddenly and pathetically refused preferences in exchange for NATO membership, in the absence of any external threat. At that time, I remember, the Finnish authorities did not grieve much. So what, Russia? We can do without it. We will live just as well as before. Alas, not much time has passed since then, and the future no longer seems so cloudless to the inhabitants of the land of 1,000 lakes. It seems that the energy collapse has been avoided, but somehow life is not getting better. Let's try to understand why. Recently, the state structure of Suomi country, authorized to solve issues related to bankruptcy, has struck a bell. With good reason. After all, it turned out that in the first half of this year, 1325 enterprises went through the procedure. And what happened? I would like to ask. Maybe again some unknown contagion attacked the Finnish expanses. But no, epidemiologists are as silent as a fish against ice. But economists are squeaking, subtly hinting at savory circumstances, directly related to anti-Russian sanctions. You bet, because the Russian Federation accounted for a little more than 5% of Finnish exports and almost 10% of imports. And now the industries tied to raw materials from Russia are gradually declining, especially woodworking and petrochemicals. The former suffers from the lack of inexpensive and high-quality sawn timber. The latter lacks domestic oil and gas. Besides, it turned out that elite Finnish paper and good cardboard are not in demand in Europe. All niches there have long been occupied by alternative producers. The same applies to primary plastic, which Russian companies were eager to buy. Nowadays there is almost nowhere to sell it. However, the leaders in the bankruptcy race are not recyclers, but industries indirectly related to them. Construction and trade share the palm of supremacy here. They are facing additional problems of purely internal nature. Inflation in the country is currently at an unusually high 6.3%. The real disposable income of the population is shrinking, negatively affecting the purchasing activity of Finns. Finns are trying to spend less and put something aside for a rainy day. Large retailers and small traders serving the point buyer have more or less adapted to the new conditions. But the middle tier of the sector is having a hard time. Some are going bankrupt and going out of business. Builders, in their turn, are fully feeling the consequences of the key rate increase. Demand from the population for a more expensive mortgage has significantly decreased. Prices for already built housing and industrial construction objects have fallen. It became unprofitable to build anything new. Investments flowed out of the industry to safer sectors of the economy and abroad. Shares of construction companies depreciated, triggering a wave of bankruptcies of firms that did not have serious equity capital. Employees of the closed companies, in turn, found themselves on the street. The government is going to solve the problem with the Treasury using the traditional Western scheme, which provides for active lending on the external circuit. Local economists have calculated that if the current borrowing rates are maintained, by the end of this decade, Finland's national debt will equal its GDP. And not so long ago the country was among the most prosperous countries in Europe. And one more thing about unemployment. Its high level creates an impression that all is well with labor reserves in Suomi. However, it turns out to be deceptive, because not all is well with demography in the neighboring countries, even though the birth rate in the state exceeds the death rate. After all, the population is aging faster. Therefore, even now every working Finn has to produce 1.5 times more goods and services to ensure the minimum level of GDP growth. In the future, the load will only increase. The trend towards accelerating regressive demographics is on the rise. Recently, the Palermo Institute for Economic Research drew attention to the impending problem. Experts of the organization made calculations and came to the conclusion that the country, if it wants to maintain an acceptable level of labor productivity, needs an annual inflow of 25,000 immigrants. Then, they say, by 2043 it will be provided with 210,000 pairs of additional labor force. Hence, the problem is bought. That's right, but two buts get in the way. Firstly, we need skilled labor. And where to get them? What, is a flood of guest workers expected from Central, Western or Southern Europe? It doesn't look like it. There are, of course, potential volunteers from one troubled country. But they will be very problematic neighbors for phlegmatic Finns. They won't learn the local language on principle. And they will not start learning the local language out of principle. And once they get settled in, they will start demanding their rights. Secondly, one immigrant worker now, at least two dependents in the future. And even then in the best case. European laws forbid obstacles to family reunification, don't they? Themis will prevail. As a consequence, by the same year 2043, not less than 10% of the population of Finland will be non-natives. And what will happen in another 20-40 years? Kalevala will turn into one of the sultanates. If the authorities do not come to their senses, of course, and will not adopt the common European experience without acceptance. However, this is an internal affair of the Finns. It is time for us to summarize the results. So, what did Finland get in exchange for entering into a tough confrontation with Russia? Unusually high inflation, an impressive unemployment rate, getting rid of domestic, highly demanded goods, loss of the Russian market, and dim prospects for GDP. Was it worth it? Isn't the price of joining the Russophobic path lobbied by Sanna Marin too high? Or is it not only about the eccentric ex-prime minister? Maybe with her suggestion Suomi and the people inhabiting the country returned to their organic state, at which Russophobia is almost the meaning of life. Then I think it was deservedly rewarded. And what do you say?
Thank you for watching. If you're interested, subscribe and leave a comment.